Welcome to Bazza's podcast, brought to you by Barry York in the land down under. We discuss popular culture and politics. Our motto is, question everything. Today's instalment is about the wonderful world of professional wrestling, going back to the 1960s and 70s, the golden age of Killer Kowalski, Brute Bernard, Mario Milano, Skull Murphy, Clem Lakis, Bulldog Brower, Sheikh Wadi Ayoub, George Barnes, Mitsu Arakawa, Professor Tanaka, Mark Lewin, George Lackey, Vince Man Mountain Montana, Johnny Gray, Ron Miller, Larry O'Day, Contolia, Spiros Arion, King Curtis and the People's Army, and Australia's hero Roy Heffernan, all made even more exciting by the colour commentary of greats like Sam Menniker and Australia's greatest commentator of all, Jack Little. And let's not forget the referees, George Atta, Michael Hunt, Wallaby Bob McMasters, Eddie Swan and Tony Marino. Wild nights at Festival Hall in Melbourne and other stadiums around the country. Riots sometimes broke out. I was in one in 1964 at Festival Hall in Melbourne when the Mongolian Stomper attacked Dominic DeNucci using the brass bell at ringside to hit him over the head. The 7,000 Italian fans in the stadium went crazy. Professional wrestling, promoted by Jim Barnett and Johnny Doyle, who were American promoters, was brought to Australia that year. It was televised up until 1978 under various promotions, and it was hugely popular, especially among newly arrived immigrant communities. Each community had a tailor-made hero, like Dominic DeNucci for the Italians, Spiros Arion for the Greeks, Mikhail Cicluna for the Maltese, Sheikh Wadi Ayoub for the Lebanese. David Mansour is of Lebanese descent. I interviewed him in 1994 for the National Library of Australia, and we talked about his memories of the wrestling as a young Lebanese Australian wrestling fan.
In 1964 I was 10. I was never really interested, especially in wrestling. I was interested in sports generally, but what had happened with this new show on TV, on Channel 9, World Championship Wrestling, just caught the imagination. There was no special interest before then, and the theatre and the gimmickry of it was just something I was hooked into from the time that it started. It was just so different. It was a sort of violence, I guess, on an acceptable violence where nobody ever really got hurt. And I think that sort of also captured the imagination of a lot of the population. And it was all about really exciting people, where sports that I was interested in never really did that to the same extent. Back then, I mean, all we used to do was kick a footy on the road and not much else. Wrestling became quite important and something that I'd look forward to each week to take my mind off perhaps other things, to really, get excited by these huge blokes, grappling with each other on screen. To the point where, I must say, the biggest punishment that I can recall from my childhood days, I rode a bike from North Balwyn to Northcote to see my aunt at Northcote. I was 10. My parents didn't know where I was. That's a trip of something like 12 kilometres, gone for a couple of hours at least. When I got back, they were so relieved that I was back, but then their relief turned to anger. They, in the end, said, well, your punishment is going to be... And I had got back, especially in time to watch the wrestling on Saturday afternoon. They said, there's no wrestling. I said, hang on, you've got to be joking. No, you're not watching it. And I went and got the stick. There was a stick my father had, which he always used to threaten us with, but never really beat us with. And I grabbed the stick, handed it to him and said, please, just beat me, but let me watch your wrestling. No go. It became an event on Sunday, and we always had to go to church. I would watch the wrestling. As soon as church finished, we went into the priest's home. He lived next door, and a lot of men would gather around and put it on World of Sport, and I'd come in and just change it to wrestling and sit down, and they gradually got used to that, and they were really switched on to wrestling from that too. I remember the first time I went to Festival Hall, it was in 1967. It was a birthday party for a guy at school, and he took 8 or 10 mates of his to the wrestling, his parents did, and I remember walking into Festival Hall and just being in awe of the place, and the lights, the ring. I was just staggered by the whole theatre of it. I mean, I'd never seen anything like it. We had a seat approximately 6 rows from the front, and it was for, a supposed world title match. It was Killer Kowalski and Chief Billy Whitewolf. That brings back a lot of memories. There was also a 6-man tag team match which featured Skull Murphy and Brute Bernard on one side, I forget who with, and on the other side it was Bearcat Wright, Mark Lewin, and I forget the third. But fascinating stuff, and I sat there enthralled, as did a lot of the guys. I mean, I wasn't the only one enthralled with wrestling. There were a lot of guys, my age, a lot of my peers were totally wrapped. My parents made a special effort to see it at the start, especially because they remembered the wrestling from the 50s, which featured Gorgeous George. Radio, yeah. Garibaldi, I used to remember my parents talking about a wrestler, Leo Garibaldi. And they carried, now there was a break, and then when World Championship Wrestling came on in 64, well, they were right into it to carry on from their own memories, and I was picked up in the draft, so to speak.
Yeah, I see. And was it an instant attraction? Like as soon as you saw it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I saw these guys with the histrionics and the ranting and the raving, and it's just something completely new. We'd never seen anything like that before. But the sort of the ranting and the raving and the threats and the implied violence, all were new back then. The wrestling itself was interesting, the actual wrestling, not just the punching and the forearm jolts and the jumping from the top rope or whatever, but the actual wrestling, the holds. And a lot of these people that came out to Australia, and the Australians themselves, like Roy Heffernan for example, they had their own holds. And it was just interesting to see the different holds and how they would be applied and how they would make an opponent submit, and etc. So all of that was just completely new.
And also, I wondered what you think of this idea, that part of the attraction was that it was to do with the conflict of good and evil, and that it was an ongoing conflict.
Definitely. It was always goodies and baddies, black and white. It was very simple. People could identify with one side or another. There was very little grey. There was no grey area. People always want answers, and there were the answers, right? Who's the goodie? He is. Who's the baddie? He is. Who should win this? Who do I want to see win? Fine. But while most would go for the goodies, and I certainly did too. I mean, I was, probably a goody myself, and sort of saying, yeah, I want Spiros to win, I want Mark Lewin to win, and all the rest. The baddies had a very powerful attraction, because part of the idea was that the goodies would often in the end triumph, but it would not so often be a clean triumph, and you always were left with the idea that the baddies, the villains in the piece, were somehow just about invincible, and the goodies had to really do something extraordinary to gain a victory. The baddies always inspired a fear. They always inspired not just a loathing, but a fear, and through that, I guess, some sort of admiration. Geez, look at these guys. They really can't be beaten. But yeah, that good, bad, and that also, of course, was in the context of the times. I mean, we were in the middle of a Cold War. The Second World War even was still fresh in many people's minds, and of course, the wrestling wrestling brought out a lot of these things. You had your Russian baddies, you had your German baddies, and of course the goodies were always Americans or Australians, or Japanese baddies, your Professor Tanaka and Mitsuo Arakawa and all of these people. And of course that built on people's prejudices. Now, I think at that stage I was too young to have prejudices in that regard, but I guess in some way a case could be made that goody-baddie type division could well have built up prejudices in a lot of people. Professional wrestling, World Championship Wrestling, was then a series of mini-stories that go on throughout concurrently, sometimes as a result of one mini-story that's just finished. And it's great. I mean, it's great because it's like watching a film and looking at the next instalment. Or not a film, say a TV series, and looking at the next instalment.
And do you think I'm right in saying that the ultimate aim, like the ultimate way of satisfying or resolving the drama, was for the good guy to pin the bad opponent with just a straight 1, 2, 3 count with no complications?
That certainly meant audience satisfaction had been achieved. It also meant the end of the mini-series, so it couldn't go on, and that really came at the very end of an ongoing feud. But the clean pinfalls were unusual. I'll tell you one time, you see, there was a wrestler, Red Bastien, from America. Now, a vivid memory of Red Bastien gaining the upper hand on his dreaded opponent, and his dreaded opponent at that time was Bulldog Brower. They were building up a feud, so obviously the feud had to be manufactured, and what better place to manufacture it but on TV. Now, the ultimate satisfaction, rather than Red Bastien pinning Bulldog Brower had beaten some no-hoper wrestler, and just for TV purposes, and had continued to attack him after. The satisfaction came for the audience when Red Bastien jumped into the ring to protect the guy that was getting beaten up. Bulldog Brower then turned his attention to Red Bastien. Now, I remember this clearly. Went to throw a punch, Red Bastien blocked the punch, and with one punch hit Bulldog Brower on the jaw and knocked him out cold. This is supposed to be a clean knockout. And of course, the audience has gone wild. I've gone wild. I thought, this is fantastic. They've come off. Red Bastien has saved his own honour, saved the honour of the guy that was being beaten. They've dragged him out, and all's well. Now, the feud, of course, had just been building up. Bulldog Brower was later interviewed in his crazy, manic way. Did you see? He looked at Jack Little and he said, "Did you see what happened? You see, he got me with a sucker punch while I wasn't looking. He spun me around and he knocked," making all the excuses, of course. But the ultimate thing there was that audience satisfaction was immediately attained before or just as the feud was starting. Red Bastien, to my knowledge, was never able to pin throughout that feud Bulldog Brower, and it wasn't ever cleanly resolved in Red Bastien's favour. In fact, he got beaten up a few times by Brower after that. But I think you're right. It's just that it meant that once there was a clean pin, the promoters had very little place else to go. And it's symptomatic too of I guess it's cliched, but of the simpler perspectives on life that people had then, I think, compared to now. Because the good-bad dichotomy was so ever-present, the audience didn't waver in their loyalty. He became bad, okay, we'll barrack for the goodie. They might have been disappointed, but they'll barrack for the goodie.
I always think of Killer Carl Cox when...
Oh, yes.
As I remember it, he said that his mother had died, and on her deathbed she asked him to change his ways in the ring. He went from being an utter fiend to being a good guy who joined the People's Army with Mark Lewin and
yes, that's right, and King Curtis, that's right, and was certainly by me and by others that enjoyed wrestling, was instantly accepted as a member of the People's Army. Gone were his days of being... In fact, his days of being bad were an advantage because that gave him that mean killer edge that perhaps the goodies might have been a little soft on.
wondering, to what extent do you think professional wrestling had an ethnic following?
Certainly a very, very important factor, and I lived part of that throughout my support of wrestling when I saw, for example, a Lebanese wrestler, Sheikh Wadi Ayoub, who would really attracted a huge Lebanese following throughout Australia. The so-called line, or the tactic, was to widen its appeal to non-English speaking backgrounds through the use of the TV interview in the foreign language, be it Italian, Greek, Arabic, whatever. Strangely, that usually appeared only with the good guys. You never saw Waldo von Erich speaking German to attract the Germans, or Mitsu Arakawa or Professor Tanaka speaking Japanese. Admittedly, of course, at that stage there weren't too many Japanese residing in Australia. But the good guys certainly, if they were from non-English speaking backgrounds, would use their native tongues to try and attract the range of multicultural residents in Australia, and it was very, very effective. I can remember commenting to a friend, having left Festival Hall one Saturday night, it really was a case of spot the Australian. And really there was a huge Italian, Greek and Lebanese following. And Turkish, actually, Maltese, etc.
Well, Baron Cicluna was Maltese.
Yes.
And there was Chaya Nandor.
That's right, Hungarian. That's right, yes. There were many there. And even as a kid, to hear on TV, we'd go into the priest's house after church on a Sunday afternoon and catch the last part of the wrestling. And I was always dying to get out of church quickly so I could see what was on. And to hear, there would be dead silence in the room. This was packed with Lebanese blokes who would all suddenly fall silent when Sheikh Wadi Ayoub would start to speak Lebanese, Arabic, and would start to say, look, all of my fans come and see the match, and this is what I intend to do. And when that's said in your own native tongue, wow, you're going to be there. My mother, if we were at church, well, we had to go to church up to a certain age, and I'd go with my father. My mother would watch the wrestling, she'd stay home, she would watch the wrestling, and she would write down the results. She would write down the matches and the results, and there were usually 4 or 5 or so. So I'd come home, because I'd missed most of it, because church was going up until the last quarter of an hour of the show or thereabouts. So we'd come home and say, okay, who was on? And what matches are going to be on this Saturday?
Please tell me about Jack Little.
The first time I saw Jack was with Tommy Hanlon Jr. on It Could Be You, a sort of a ladies' daytime TV program that I'd watched during the holidays, and he had this raspy voice. But he had done a lot of wrestling commentaries from the 1950s. And he had the voice that matched the wrestlers. It was a rasping, ongoing voice when he was commentating. In some cases he'd just never stop. He was engrossed in what he did, which was fantastic, because you got a sense of the feeling of what was happening through Jack's commentaries. This is on TV, and of course was renowned for several sayings. I mean, quite inane actually, but there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the picture speaks 1,000 words. I mean, common, but he used to repeat these all the time. Or after being abused by a wrestler, he'd just look at a blank stare into the camera and he'd go, no comment. Or after a goodie was being interviewed and would leave in a rage, he'd go, wow. All of these sorts of you could obviously recall others, but
one
he
that I think of is wham bam, thank you man.
Yes.
Well, how about that?
Yeah, how about that? Yeah, I mean, people would instantly recognise the saying and the voice. That's Jack Little, and identified Jack Little was Mr. Wrestling, like Ted Whitten or Ron Barassi were Mez's Australian rules football. And of course became embroiled in many of the feuds and the instances of violence on wrestling, which sort of you became very worried as to what was going to happen to frail old Jack.
Yeah, he was like a straight man.
He was a straight man, and when he became embroiled in conflict, one example in particular with Killer Carl Cox, he at Festival Hall jumped up onto the ring disputing a decision, and Cox lifted him up and gave him a brain buster on the ring. Now this Jack Little at that stage, what, mid-50s perhaps? A bloke like that, and of course the move, I believe, went wrong, and he didn't land as he should have landed and was hospitalised for a short time after that. And it was written up in the papers as a wrestling stunt backfires.
To what extent back then did you believe the wrestling was real? Now, when I say real, obviously it was real, it happened, but I mean, did you know that it was choreographed and predetermined?
At first, no. In fact, that's a very interesting question, because I can almost pinpoint the time when my beliefs in that regard changed. Certainly from about 64 to sometime in 67, I thought that, well, in the very early years I thought, no, this is all real and they hate each other and they're belting each other. And it never crossed my mind back then, well, okay, they're not injured, they've walked away. I recognised that, but it only struck me later as something that, oh, that's a bit odd. Now, the two things that occurred, first one was in an Australian magazine called Inside Wrestling. There is a photo of Skull Murphy in ordinary clothes, street clothes, with a hat at an airport. And with him is Sam Meneker, wrestling commentator, an American wrestling commentator, and they're chatting amiably. However, I had seen Skull Murphy in the past abusing, threatening Sam Meneker, talking wildly to him, and here they are chatting amiably. Hang on, something's wrong here. that can't be right. The next event, and this was a second event, and I would have been, I think, in time closely associated with the first. I went to the wrestling to see. The match was Killer Kowalski and Chief Billy Whitewolf, which I referred to earlier. It was promoted as a World Championship match. Okay, that's fine. Can accept all of that. I'm in the 6 or so rows from the front. And it's Killer Kowalski that has Chief Billy Whitewolf in a headlock. He lifts the knee. While he has the headlock on Chief Billy Whitewolf, and he lifts the knee in order to deliver a knee blow to the chin to send Chief Billy Whitewolf onto the mat. Well, I had a direct view of this, and sure, the knee went up, and sure, Billy Whitewolf hit the mat and was grabbing his face, having had a knee applied to it. The only thing missing from that was that I had a clear vision that the knee and the chin didn't connect. And it was right in front of me, and I was staggered by that. My first reaction was, oh hell, I've blinked and I've missed it. sort of like Muhammad Ali's punch to Sonny Liston when he hit him and he was supposed not to have connected. But I thought, no, I've missed something there. I've blinked, and it must look Billy Whitewolf's on the ground clutching his face, and you know, obviously hurt. So the knee must have hit. But when I put that together with Meneker, and it wasn't any conscious thing, this was something that just dawned on me. Yeah. It was no great decision I came to say, oh, wrestling is fake. But that together with, I think it was in 69, wrestlers were being pressured to join Actors Equity, and that basically was the final straw. It just became clear over time that wrestling was choreographed, the endings were worked or predetermined, and there was an ongoing storyline with the different feuds that the wrestlers had. But interestingly, none of that diminished my enjoyment of professional wrestling. I was quite happy with that because the wrestlers didn't make it appear to be an act. The wrestlers actually themselves worked very hard at maintaining the veneer of authenticity, and that was something I liked. By and large, I mean, it wasn't authentic as a sport given its predetermined outcome and its choreography of moves, but I still loved it.
Thanks to David Mansour for his cooperation. Music by the late, great, much missed friend Peter Gelling. Thank you for listening.